What's up guys? The rest of my family have all gone out for the day. In fact, they've all gone to the beach for a beautiful day in the sunshine, but because I am locked down in quarantine after my trip to Germany, I'm staying here. But it does mean that I've got space and time and quiet to get on with a bunch of videos that I'm kind of halfway through or planning for this week, hopefully uninterrupted. So cleaning up the garden from kids and dog toys, and then I'm going to have a quick workout, and then I'm going to crack on with it. Okay, when I said uninterrupted, clearly I've forgotten about the dogs. Right, so a few things I've got to get on with today. One is a sneak preview of something I'm working on for another video, which you'll see coming very soon. Another thing that I need to do today is I'm going to try and record up in the treehouse, up there in that tree. The Tales from the Treehouse for this week. I'm going to try and get that in the bag whilst I've got the space and freedom to do that today. And what I really want to do today, let me just set this down, is, as we quite often do here, is go through some of the stories in the SeedStream app, because there's quite a bit of stuff still going on behind the scenes as we get ever closer and closer to a first Grand Prix of 2020. And whilst we're talking about SeedStream, if you don't know what that is, it's the app that I keep banging on about. I've been talking to you guys for some time about. It's an app that I find really useful for all of the F1 news, updated every single day. And the reason I've been banging on about it, and the reason I've been encouraging you guys to go and download it, is because I've been trying to help out a mate of mine, Ollie. Now, Ollie started SeedStream when he was back in university. He's grown into a developer, and the platform has grown incredibly. I've had some chats recently with him about what his future plans are, because there's about 3,000 of you that currently use this, you know, regularly, coming back to use this over and over again, of which I'm one. He has some great plans for this app, and because of that, some exciting news I can share with you now is that I am no longer just helping out a mate with this. I'm getting involved. I've become a shareholder in the SeedStream business. And that's because I believe in Ollie's vision so much and where we can take this thing. So I'm actually going to get him onto the channel very soon to explain, in his own words, you can meet him, explain exactly what the plans are for the future. And something quite exciting is that you guys potentially could help get involved in shaping that to an even greater degree. I'll leave it there because he can come on and explain a bit more in more detail, but that's quite exciting from my perspective. But let's look into the SeedStream app, because some of the news that came out over the last couple of days is worth exploring further. You can probably hear that the guy with the chainsaw is back. I mean, literally there can't be many more trees left to chop down. This guy's been running around with a chainsaw for weeks now, and he seems to switch it on every time I press record on this thing. Right, that's better. Showered, clean, reset. So let's talk about these graphics that were unveiled by Formula One yesterday. New TV graphics for 2020. I put a post on Instagram yesterday asking for your opinions on what you thought of it, and overwhelmingly, in fact maybe even exclusively, the responses were all 100% negative. Nobody likes it. Let me just read you what the story quickly says in the SeedStream app. It says Formula One and AWS, so that's Amazon Web Services, with which Formula One have a commercial partnership, will bring 6 new on-screen graphics this season to provide fans with more information, starting with a car performance score, which will be rolled out at the season opening Austrian Grand Prix. They will unveil 6 new TV graphics over the course of the 2020 season, giving things around the car and driver a score, like it says. Now, this is all done with good intention. Let's not forget it's a commercial partnership, so AWS and Formula One, as part of their commercial deal, I've no doubt will have clauses in there which mean they have to utilise the services of AWS and integrate Formula One data and try to find a way to visualise that and utilise it in a way that might be interesting to fans. That's all great, I get all that, and the theory behind it is great. Potentially in the future, it could lead to something amazing. What we had in 2019 was the first iteration of this, where we had things like the predicted pit stop window or the tyre life graphics popping up on our screens that I think overwhelmingly back in 2019 were negatively received as well. And the reason for most of that is that it wasn't accurate enough. You know, yes, it was based on some data, but it didn't have enough data or enough accurate real-time data to give a real genuine picture of the car's performance or the tyre's performance. And you only got to look at the team's reactions to those graphics to understand that. Nobody in the Formula One pit lane takes those graphics with any seriousness at all. They look at them as a bit of a joke. Now, on one hand, you could say the graphics are certainly not targeting those in the Formula One pit lane. They're targeting new viewers or casual Formula One viewers who might stumble across a Grand Prix, which can be hugely complex on their TV screens, and this will help them to understand some of the things that are going on behind the scenes. And there is some sense to that. That probably will have a decent effect. It could provide a little bit more interest and a bit more entertainment to some of those fans. The problem is, and the problem that was very clear from the responses to my Instagram post yesterday, was that the large majority of Formula One fans are not the casual viewer that's stumbling across it whilst flicking through the TV channels on a Sunday afternoon. They are fans that are dedicated, knowledgeable, experienced, that understand, at least to some extent, what Formula One's all about, and they see some of these graphics as being patronising to them. So the 6 new graphics are car performance scores, ultimate driver speed comparison, high speed and low speed corner performance, driver skill ratings, car and team development and overall season performance ratings, and qualifying and race pace predictions. And the problem that Formula One has is that, yes, of course, it wants to entice new viewers, and it wants, when it gets new viewers, to be able to have them understand this incredibly complicated sport of Formula One so that they don't quickly continue flicking through the channels and disappear again. They want them to stay, they want to understand what's going on the racetrack when they see it, why one car might be faster at the end of a straight than another car. But isn't that the job of the commentators and the pundits around the sport to be able to give that explanation? If we've got great big boxes showing the low speed performance, cornering performance right above a car as 2 cars are going side by side into a corner, that's distracting from what we should be watching, which is the 2 cars racing each other through a corner. But the problem they've got is balancing the historic and traditional huge viewership that Formula One has right now, that have already got a serious knowledge of how this sport works, balancing that with a potential new viewership coming through. I'm not saying that I've got the answer to this. There's no easy solution, because the 2 opposing halves of that audience, and they're not halves, in fact, the 2 sections of that audience, new and traditional, have very differing needs from what they get from their coverage. So can't we find a way to personalise or tailor that coverage depending on who you are? I was watching the football here in the UK the other night, that's come back, of course, without fans in the stadium, and there's an option flicking between 2 separate channels to either have the crowd noise, the simulated crowd noise, or to have just the natural effects of the stadium, where you can hear the players shouting to each other and the manager shouting onto the pitch. You have that choice. Now, I know that you have a choice because it's Sky and they have a number of different channels, and we can switch between one channel and another to get the 2 different effects or no effect. Formula One, most Formula One broadcasters don't have that option. But maybe there's a way through digital services or through the app that can have this kind of information as an option that we don't all have to have. The challenge with that, of course, is that most casual viewers are not using the app or the digital services. They are stumbling across it on the TV main broadcast. So I don't know what the actual answer is. Maybe you guys have some suggestions, but I know that the graphics they've unveiled, and from what we saw last year with their graphics, it hasn't gone down well. And what they have to be very careful of doing whilst trying to entice new viewers in is to not alienate the ones we've already got. This has been brilliant. This little rear wing project I think you're going to love. I've enjoyed making it massively. Been doing it with the kids, and you'll see it very soon. Claire's slightly annoyed that our outside table has turned into a workbench and it's been constantly covered in rubbish. But there we go. You know, needs must. I don't have a garage right now, so there we go. Right, all things are better now that I've got coffee. So let's talk about the next story in the SeedStream app. I mean, seriously, someone's just fired up some kind of angle grinder over there now. This is normally a really quiet little village where I live. You never hear anything apart from the birds. The next thing I want to talk about was George Russell mentioning that the online sim racing that he's been doing over lockdown, which of course he did very well in the official F1 virtual Grand Prix, has really helped him as a driver. He says he's much faster now in the Williams sim that he's been back in over the last few days, and that's definitely understandable, of course. The thing about sim racing, as we've all seen if we watched it, is that you can easily pick up bad habits. To drive quickly, to get a quick lap time in a game like F1, the F1 game, you know, you can pick up bad habits that you wouldn't be able to do in a real car, like cutting corners and jumping over curbs and those kind of things. I don't imagine for any minute that a proper F1 driver is going to have those habits stick in as we go racing. Very quickly they will overcome those and lose them. But I think one of the interesting things that particularly for somebody like George Russell, the impact of all of this will be when he was racing last year in his debut year in a Williams that was so far off the pace. He was running around at the back almost anonymously. We never saw him on the TV coverage. He was learning his trade, and it was probably not a bad way to enter the sport for him to pick up experience, but he was very much off everybody's radar. And in the virtual world during lockdown, he's absolutely come onto everybody's radar. He did incredibly. He won the unofficial championship, didn't he? And what that's done is given him a huge amount of confidence as a person, but also as a driver. The other drivers, the superstar drivers of our sport, have sat up and taken notice of him. You can guarantee that other people within the paddock will have sat up and taken a bit more notice of George Russell. Now that's a really great thing for a driver, to boost the confidence as you walk around that paddock. And that makes a big difference, both to the way you're driving when you do get into a real car, but also how you work with your team, how you work with the media, and therefore how you portray yourself with a view to other teams and other team principals looking on at you as a potential driver for their team in the future. So I think that what George Russell has managed to do over this lockdown in the virtual world could actually genuinely have a proper, tangible, real world effect. Thoughts on that one, please? Now, one of the other things I've been doing recently is having a little bit of a clear out of some stuff from the loft and from various cupboards that are around the house. And one of the things I found recently was this brilliant little box, which just simply says Elvis F1 on the front, because it's where I've kept a lot of my F1 memorabilia. Not the big things, obviously, but just lots of photos, lots of lanyards from passes. I've got some amazing things in there. I had a very quick flick through, and I am going to do a video where we go through some of this stuff. But I just thought I'd pick out a couple of things. First of all, my F1 pit stop balaclava. Look at that. So, looks like I could definitely rob a bank with it. There you go. Can you see that? Yeah. But in a world where we're now having to cover our faces when we go out in public, might dig that out again. So that's that. This is a really cool picture that it's one of my favourite pictures that I actually got Lewis to sign. That was a picture that was taken of me with Lewis back in the day. I believe that would have been in 2006 when he was a GP2 or F2 driver as it was back then. And one of the nice things about that I like to always remember is that Lewis used to come in, obviously he was a McLaren young driver, if you like, at that point. He was on the radar of McLaren. He used to come into our garage back then, because F2 was on the same billing, so it was always at the circuit. He'd wander into our garage and he would come and chat to us all, long before he became a Formula 1 driver. But he'd come and chat to me quite often and ask about the car and ask about some of the technical details. And that picture is actually of me explaining how some of the things inside the McLaren F1 cockpit work. Just simple things, like he was always interested in how does the fire extinguisher detonation system work, you know, how he wanted to know how these technical details work, how we could adjust the brake balance on the cars, and he'd want a full explanation. And we'd sit there and chat for half an hour sometimes, which I never had time to do, but it was always really interesting. I made time to do it because it was such an interesting subject. I was fascinated, you know, with all that stuff anyway. But it was nice to have a driver show so much interest in the side of the cars that we were involved with, the technical side. Because actually, the reality is not that many drivers, I mean, not all, it's not true to say that no drivers have that, but a lot of drivers, first of all, don't have time to go and sit through those kind of explanations or to come and spend time in the garage. Some of them just don't have an interest. They're only interested in sitting in it, making sure they can press the pedals hard enough, and off they go. So it's really nice to see, and actually if you think about where Lewis has gone on to since then, perhaps it was a little bit of instinct, a little bit of insight into the type of person and the type of driver Lewis was going to be, where he was always, even back then, looking for the tiny details that might help him to go a little bit faster, to be a little bit more consistent, to understand how the car operated and what he could do to make it go a bit quicker. So anyway, we will get into a lot more of that. I could sit, like, literally I could sit here all day going through this stuff, but oh, so tempting. No, I'll save it for another video because there's some brilliant stuff in there. I'll keep that for another day. Let's talk about the next story in the SeedStream app, because this is one that I wanted to mention. The story starts off by saying Giuseppe Olivieri, the doctor who operated on Alex Zanardi following his collision with a truck during a handbike event, says the 53-year-old's injuries aren't comparable with those sustained by Michael Schumacher following his 2013 skiing accident, but confirmed that it's too early to bring Zanardi out of his induced coma and evaluate the full extent of the damage. I mean, heartbreaking story. Alex Zanardi, one of the most, probably the most inspirational person I've ever been fortunate enough to meet. An incredible guy. I was lucky enough to go and spend a weekend with him down in Mugello for his 50th birthday, making a feature for Sky Sports where I interviewed him about his original accident, and his attitude and his explanation of how he overcame that still resonates with me today. And I said this in the live stream the other night. I still refer back in my mind to the things he said to me that day when I'm facing any kind of challenge, when I've got something that might seem insurmountable. I always think back, nothing's insurmountable. Just look at what Alex did. And it's heartbreaking to see that he's having to go through something like this again, and his family and his friends to go through such suffering. Very serious injuries. He's in a stable but serious condition, still in an induced coma as it says, and we don't yet have a prognosis for any kind of prospects of recovery, which is just devastating. I mean, the one thing I did say the other day, which I'll say again, is that if anybody can overcome a challenge like this, it will be Alex. But we just don't know the full extent of his injuries, and I find it so heartbreaking to have to see that him and his family and friends are having to go through this over and over again. He's been through enough, that guy. So my heart goes out to him and them, and I wish them all the very best for whatever outcome we might get from this. But I'm sure you'll all join me in that one. Very, very sad story. The next one talks about Ferrari taking a test with a 2018 car at Mugello. And that's quite interesting in that they weren't supposed to be testing at Mugello. They were actually going to be testing at Fiorano. That's a test with a 2018 car that they were allowed to do, which was mostly to get procedures locked down for the new COVID-19 procedures. So the social distancing, the face mask wearing, the new procedures within the garage in terms of how it's laid out and how people can work. That's what everybody's doing these tests for, because it's an important part of the process they're going to have to get used to. But interestingly, Ferrari switched it to Mugello because, on at least for some part, because there is a high chance that Mugello could end up being a race on the 2020 calendar after Monza in September. And of course that would be useful to have some recent data. It's a circuit that Ferrari owns, so technically they can go there any time with an old car. But if they were going to run a car in the times that we've got right now, that was the place to do it. So it made a lot of sense for them. They will have got something out of that in terms of assessing the circuit, the lumps and bumps in the circuit, the curbs, those kind of things, getting the drivers used to and into the groove of that circuit. limited in what they can gain, of course, with an old car on different tyres, but still useful nonetheless. So that seemed like an interesting but probably a sensible move, and I think AlphaTauri, I believe, are going to Imola, probably for very similar reasons, in that Imola is also a potential race on the 2020 calendar. So those kind of things will give some interesting data and feedback, both for driver and team, if indeed we do end up racing there. Sorry, I've just got distracted with this box next to me. I started looking through it again, and I found an old diary. I didn't even realise I kept a diary. I didn't keep it for very long, but this was from 2006, and I wrote a couple of months worth of entries in here almost every day when we were on the road racing. And I just want to read you one, because if you've read my book, you'll know what this refers to, but this just made me laugh as I read it. April the 3rd, Monday, April the 3rd. This is the Monday after the Australian Grand Prix of 2006. So it says we got a good result, but a bit gutted that we didn't win. Fred, which is what we used to call Kimi back in the day. We used to call him Fred for anonymity. If we were out in public, particularly when we used to go to Finland, if we said the word Kimi anywhere, there'd be people swarming around anywhere, so we called him Fred. Fred got second behind Alonso. Monty, that's Montoya, could have had third, but went off towards the end of the race, and the resulting damage caused electrical failure. Remember that? Then it goes on Monday morning. This is the day after the race. Bit of a mad night last night. A few bars, blagged away into a Williams party, met the Red Bull chief mechanic who said he would like me to go to Red Bull. Ended up having a bit of a room party at Fred's, and that ended in a massive food fight. Got back to my hotel at 11 AM. And then, of course, Tuesday the 4th must have been on the plane flying home to the UK. Wednesday, when I arrived home, Marky, which is Marc Arnold, Kimi's trainer, Marky said Kimi got a $20,000 bill for the damage in his hotel suite, and Ron knows but doesn't know who was there. Apparently Christian Klein, remember him, Red Bull driver? Apparently Christian Klein told him that all he could remember was there were some English blokes there. Thursday the 6th. My body clock is absolutely fucked. So I think we could have some mileage out of that as well. I didn't know I'd done that. I'd totally forgotten about that. But I do remember that massive food fight in Kimi's hotel suite on the night after the Grand Prix back in 2006. Anyway, that could potentially be a Tales from the Treehouse. And speaking of which, it's probably time I went up and climbed up into the treehouse and started doing it. So we're heading up to the treehouse to film Tales from the Treehouse from this week, and I have actually, given what we just discussed a moment ago, decided to cover that story that I just touched on briefly from my diary there about the night we ended up with a massive food fight inside Kimi's hotel room. So this is the stuff I take up. The camera obviously on a tripod that's in my hand here. I've got a little GoPro that I use for another angle. I've got another little mount that I stick my phone in to get another angle. And I've got a little device here that just pans around that I'm going to try today to get a bit of a time lapse for another, perhaps potentially interesting shot. And of course the book. So I always set up a main camera, but then I try and pop up things like a GoPro in a corner just to get some varying angles. Partly because it makes the film a little bit more interesting if you see it from multiple angles, but secondly, it gives me an opportunity to put cuts in the film if I need to stop or redo something or have a flick through the book and read what I'm going to talk about next. By changing the camera angle, it gives me a nice point to make a cut. So that's why I do it. Now, one of the other things that I've learnt to try and do when I'm doing these particular shoots up in the treehouse is to use a clip-on mic, which I don't always use because quite often I use the mic on top of the camera, which works perfectly well in many situations. But up here, up in the treehouse, which I'm sure you'll have heard if you've seen these videos before, and you may even hear in a moment, is that because we're in a tree and often the wind's blowing a little bit, things start to move and the treehouse creaks like crazy. So by using a clip-on mic, which is a sort of much closer up personal mic, you get less of that creaky noise in the background. That's the idea anyway. Oh, by the way, before I forget, if you were watching Monday's live Q&A, you'll have noticed at the end of that I talked about having a potential co-host for next week's live show. The last show before we go racing again, I want one of you guys to join me to co-host the show. If you'd like that to be you, all I need you to do is really simple. You must be subscribed to the channel, which I'm sure most of you are anyway. You must be following me on Instagram and Twitter, because that's how I'll get in touch and how we'll make arrangements for it. And you must have access to Zoom, because I'll bring in your Zoom call feed into my show, and that's how we'll make it work. All I need you to do, if you've got all of those boxes ticked, is to drop me a comment underneath this particular video and let me know that first of all you want to do it, and then tell me why I should pick you. That's all it's got to be, something really short, really simple. Tell me why you would like to co-host Monday's live Q&A with me, the last one before racing resumes, and I'll pick one of you at random and we'll make it happen. Do it now. Right, that's the Tales from the Treehouse done. I think it might be quite an interesting and entertaining one, something slightly different, less about the racing, more about the après racing this week. Anyway, you'll catch that on Friday once I've edited it later in the week. Now though, back downstairs and on to the next video. Now, one of the opportunities that my family being out for the day affords me is the opportunity to get onto this thing without having to fight my kids for a go on the Xbox. So I fully intend to run around Austria in preparation of the first Grand Prix using this very shortly. But first, there's a couple of stories that I just want to touch on in this roundup before we go. One is the really sad situation that exists at McLaren that I had no idea of the seriousness of until very recently. And this is the case that McLaren are in desperate financial trouble as a group and need an injection of funds. And the story explains, because it's now gone into a legal battle and I can't say very much about it, not that I know too much more anyway. But the situation says that if McLaren cannot inject substantial funds into the group by the 17th of July, not very far away, then they face potential liquidation. That's a sentence I never thought I would be uttering about my beloved McLaren. Now, I know many of you are massive McLaren fans too, and I'm sure we would all join together in wishing the team the very best in finding a solution to this as quickly as possible. But what a sorry state of affairs this has become for such a great team. That's the first thing. The second thing is that Ross Brawn, there's a story here about Ross Brawn talking about how the 2021 regs, which of course got pushed back to be the 2022 regs, to the brand new cars, brand new technical and sporting regulations, because there's been a 12-month delay in introducing those, we have 12 months in which we can refine the regulations. And he goes on to say how they fully intend to go through those sets of regulations, refining them, making changes from what we have right now, because teams have already highlighted areas where they think there's an opportunity to circumnavigate the original intention of a regulation or to exploit a loophole. And F1, through Ross Brawn, fully intend to go through those and try and close as many as they can, or make modifications that might improve the effectiveness of the regulations moving forward. So a sensible move, but we may well see some significant changes to what we thought 2022 might look like yet. And finally, I want to talk on this one, which makes me mad. The fact that Liberty, or Formula One, have done an exclusive deal with Sky Deutschland in Germany to put F1 once more behind a paywall. There'll be 4 races that will be put free to air by Sky, but the rest will be behind a paywall. And for me, it drives me mad, because we talked earlier in this very video about how they want to try and grow a new audience, attract new customers, new fans. You can't do that by putting the sport behind a paid subscription service, because you're not going to find new or casual viewers stumbling across your product if the only way they can find it is by being dedicated enough already to subscribe to a paid service. So if you want to grow the audience, you've got to put it in front of as many eyeballs as possible. You've got to have a great product so that when they do see it, they become fully invested, fully engaged in it and want to learn more about it. And then you have the opportunity to sell them subscription products or extra add-ons, bolt-ons, more data-driven services, more viewpoints, more coverage, if you like. You can do all of those things. There's so many opportunities, particularly now with digital, that F1 could sell subscriptions to already dedicated viewers. But how are you possibly going to grow an audience, a TV audience that used to be enormous and is now dwindling, despite whatever people tell you with figures of consolidated figures? It's fudging figures to say that Formula One audiences are not dwindling globally. They are. And it's things like this that are the very reason. It's such a short-sighted viewpoint of Liberty to use this model moving forward, where they take a short-term cash injection but potentially a long-term hit to the product, to the sport. I wish they wouldn't do it. It drives me crazy, and I hope that somehow we find a solution to this, because as audience numbers dwindle, it becomes less of an attractive proposition for advertisers, for brands to get involved, because less people are watching it, and so on and so on. The knock-on effects are significant. We've got to get Formula One back to a huge global audience if we want to grow it into something bigger and better. Anyway, rant over. That's it. I'm going to crack on with this. I know this video has been really long, a lot longer than I ever intended it to be, but when I started going through the first stage of the video's editing a little while ago, I realised that there wasn't too much I wanted to cut out. I thought it was all valuable stuff. So let me know your thoughts on that. Was this just way too long? Have I lost half of the audience already? Quite possibly. If you're still here, I appreciate it. Massive respect to you. Don't forget to drop me a line in the comments if you want to be part of Monday's live Q&A as a co-host, and I'd love to know your thoughts on any of the other subjects that I've covered in today's video. If you've liked it, give it a thumbs up. Please consider subscribing to the channel or telling your mates to subscribe. That would be amazing. And I'll get on with this. In the meantime, I'll see you lot very soon with some of the videos I've been working on today. Ta-da!